Jake Morrison had seen many strange things during his years commanding the exploration ship New Horizon, but nothing prepared him for what appeared on his view screen that Tuesday morning. The space around them lit up like the biggest fireworks show ever made. Huge ships the size of mountains fired beams of light at each other. Each beam could have destroyed Earth's moon in one hit. Lisa Bennett sat at the weapons station with her mouth wide open. She had trained for first contact with alien life, but not for stumbling into the middle of a space war. The tactical display showed dozens of massive ships shooting at each other, with weapons that made human missiles look like toy rockets. Some ships were long and thin like silver needles. Others looked like floating cities with towers and spikes coming out in all directions. The communication system crackled to life. A voice spoke in perfect English, though it sounded like wind blowing through metal tubes. Jake pressed the response button and tried to keep his voice steady. The alien introduced itself as Ambassador Vex Thalar of the Galactic Council. The name sounded important and scary at the same time. Jake explained that they were explorers from Earth looking for new worlds and new life. He did not mention that Earth had sent only 12 exploration ships, and this was the farthest any human had ever traveled from home. The alien seemed amused by something. Jake could hear what sounded like laughter in the background of the transmission. Ambassador Vex Thalar explained that Jake had arrived in the middle of a war that had been going on for 300 years. The Galactic Council fought against something called the Zephyrian Empire. Both sides had technology that could destroy entire planets. Both sides had been trying to win for longer than humans had been building cities. The view screen showed more details of the battle. Energy shields glowed around the alien ships like soap bubbles made of light. When the shields got hit, they flashed bright colors before going back to normal. The ships moved in ways that made no sense. They could turn without slowing down. They could stop without using rockets. Some could disappear and reappear somewhere else. Lisa ran scans on the nearest council ship. Her instruments went crazy trying to measure its power output. The alien vessel generated more energy than Earth's sun. Its weapons could fire continuously without overheating. Its engines bent space itself to move faster than light. Everything about it was impossible according to human science. A new voice came over the radio. This one sounded like rocks grinding together. War Marshal Keth Varan wanted to know why humans were in this sector of space. Jake explained about Earth's exploration program and their mission to make peaceful contact with other intelligent species. The War Marshal made a sound that definitely counted as laughter. Keth Varan asked about human military capabilities. Jake honestly described Earth's most advanced weapons: chemical rockets that could reach other planets in months or years, nuclear bombs that could destroy cities, metal bullets fired by magnetic rails. Everything he said made the aliens laugh harder. The War Marshal explained that Council species had stopped using such primitive weapons thousands of years ago. Energy beams could destroy targets instantly across vast distances. Plasma weapons could cut through any known material. Quantum torpedoes could phase through solid matter before exploding. Even the weakest council member had technology that made human weapons look like stone clubs. Jake felt embarrassed but also curious. He asked what the war was about. Ambassador Vex Thalar explained that the Zephyrian Empire wanted to control all inhabited worlds in the galaxy. The Council fought to protect the freedom of member species. Neither side could gain a permanent advantage. Battles were won and lost, but the war continued. Lisa whispered that maybe humans could help somehow. Jake knew she was thinking the same thing he was. Earth had experience with wars. Humans had fought each other for thousands of years before finally learning to work together. Maybe that experience meant something. Jake offered human assistance to the Council war effort. The silence that followed lasted so long he thought the communication had been cut. Then both aliens started laughing so hard their translators had trouble keeping up. War Marshal Keth Varan explained that humans would be destroyed in seconds against Zephyrian forces. Human ships were too slow and weak. Human weapons were too primitive. Human technology was thousands of years behind even the simplest council systems. Ambassador Vex Thalar tried to be polite. The council appreciated the offer, but humans should return to Earth and continue developing their civilization. In maybe 1,000 years, they might have technology advanced enough to be useful. For now, they would just get in the way and probably get killed. Jake felt frustrated, but he understood their point. The New Horizon was built with the best technology Earth could produce. Compared to the alien ships around them, it looked like a wooden boat next to aircraft carriers. Their fusion reactor produced less power than a single alien weapon. Their computer systems were slower than alien entertainment devices. The battle continued around them while they talked. Jake watched council ships work together in perfect coordination. They moved like dancers who had practiced the same routine for centuries. Every shot was calculated. Every movement had a purpose. It was beautiful and terrible at the same time. A group of Zephyrian ships broke through the council formation. Jake got his first close look at the enemy. Their vessels were different from council ships. Where council technology looked smooth and elegant, Zephyrian ships appeared grown rather than built. They had organic curves and surfaces that seemed to shift and flow. Their weapons fired beams of pure darkness that seemed to eat light itself. The Zephyrian ships noticed the new horizon. Jake held his breath as alien sensors examined his ship. Then the enemy vessels moved on. They had decided humans were not worth bothering with. Jake felt relieved and insulted at the same time. Ambassador Vex Thaler suggested that humans leave the battle area for their own safety. The Council could not guarantee protection for such a fragile vessel. Jake agreed, but asked to observe the battle from a safe distance. He wanted to learn how galactic warfare worked. Maybe humans could contribute something in the future. The alien agreed to let them watch. As the new horizon moved to a safer position, Jake stared at the massive battle. Ships that could destroy planets fought with weapons that could crack moons. Beings that had mastered space and time struggled against each other in a war that had lasted longer than human civilization. Lisa looked at the tactical display and shook her head. She had studied every Earth military conflict in history. This was different. This was war fought by gods using powers humans could barely imagine. But something nagged at her mind as she watched the perfect formations and calculated movements. Jake made a note in the ship's log. First contact with alien civilization had been successful. Humans had been offered a place in the galactic community once they advanced enough to be useful. The war between Council and Empire would continue. Earth would return to its quiet corner of the galaxy and keep growing. But Jake Morrison was not the kind of person who gave up easily. As he watched the battle, he started thinking. Maybe humans did not have advanced technology. Maybe their weapons were primitive. Maybe their ships were slow and weak. But humans had something else. Humans had survived by being stubborn and clever, and willing to try things that seemed impossible. The new horizon headed home with records of the greatest battle in galactic history. But Jake had a feeling this would not be the last time humans encountered this war. Kate Williams had been fighting in the Galactic War for 6 months when she discovered something that changed everything. Human soldiers did not just think differently than aliens. They acted differently in ways that made their enemies afraid. The Zephyrian Empire had started calling humans the unpredictable variable, and Kate understood why. The mission began like any other strike against enemy supply lines. Kate led 12 human marines aboard a Council assault ship, targeting a Zephyrian convoy carrying quantum shield generators. The plan was simple: disable the cargo vessels using kinetic weapons, board them if necessary, destroy the shield technology to prevent it from reaching enemy fleets. Alex Bradley commanded the assault ship with typical human stubbornness. While Council captains preferred overwhelming firepower and quick decisive victories, Alex specialized in what he called persistence tactics. Human crews could fight longer battles with fewer resources. They could survive on emergency rations and broken equipment longer than any alien species. The convoy appeared on sensors exactly where intelligence predicted. 3 large cargo ships protected by 6 escort vessels. All of them carried the quantum shields that made Zephyrian forces so difficult to defeat. Kate checked her equipment one more time. Human marines used kinetic weapons almost exclusively now. Bullets and explosives worked better than energy weapons in most situations. Paul Grant provided reconnaissance from his stealth scout ship. Human scouts had proven incredibly effective at gathering intelligence on enemy movements. While Council species relied on sensor networks and computer analysis, humans used intuition and pattern recognition. Paul could predict where enemies would go based on feelings he could not explain to alien commanders. The first phase of the attack went perfectly. Council ships armed with human railguns opened fire on the convoy from maximum range. Tungsten projectiles punched through quantum shields like they were not there. 2 escort ships exploded immediately. The cargo vessels tried to run, but their engines were damaged. Then something went wrong. Kate's assault ship took a direct hit from a hidden Zephyrian battleship that Paul's scouts had missed. The ship's energy weapons failed completely. Life support systems shut down. The human kinetic weapons were offline. They were dead in space with enemy reinforcements closing fast. Any council captain would have surrendered or abandoned ship. The vessel was too damaged to fight or run. Standard military doctrine called for evacuation to prevent unnecessary casualties. But Kate Williams was not any council captain. She was a human Marine who had spent her childhood in Detroit learning that you never give up when things look hopeless. Kate gathered her Marines in the cargo bay. She explained that they could still complete the mission using nothing but personal weapons and improvised explosives. The damaged assault ship would ram the nearest cargo vessel. Marines would board during the collision and destroy the shield generators by hand. It was crazy and dangerous and exactly the kind of plan that made aliens nervous about humans. Alex Bradley agreed to the ramming attack. His ship could not maneuver properly, but it could still move in a straight line. He aimed for the largest cargo vessel and pushed the engines to maximum power. Kate and her Marines prepared for the most violent boarding action in galactic warfare history. The collision threw everyone against bulkheads hard enough to crack bones. Kate felt her shoulder dislocate but ignored the pain. Emergency lights cast red shadows through corridors filled with smoke and floating debris. The Marines moved through the wreckage toward the enemy ship with determination that scared their alien allies. Zephyrian crew members were not prepared for hand-to-hand combat. Their species had evolved from hive insects that preferred coordination over individual fighting. They carried energy weapons designed for ship-to-ship battles. Kate's Marines used shotguns and demolition charges in close quarters where energy beams were useless. The shield generator compartment was deep inside the cargo ship. Kate led her team through corridors that had never been designed for combat. Zephyrian architecture assumed that boarding actions were impossible. The passages were narrow and twisted. There were no defensive positions or security checkpoints. Helen Price had studied alien psychology for years. She explained that most galactic species were descended from prey animals or hive minds. Humans were different. Human ancestors had been persistence hunters who could track prey for days without stopping. They could cooperate as individuals without losing personal initiative. That combination made them terrifying opponents. Kate found the shield generator surrounded by Zephyrian technicians who had no idea how to fight intruders inside their own ship. The aliens panicked when humans appeared with weapons they had never seen before. Shotgun blasts echoed through chambers designed for peaceful technical work. The psychological effect was devastating. The demolition charges were set using techniques Kate had learned from mining operations on Earth. Human explosives were primitive compared to alien technology, but they were reliable and easy to use. More importantly, humans understood how to place charges for maximum structural damage. They had been blowing things up for thousands of years. The explosion that followed destroyed not just the shield generators, but the entire rear section of the cargo ship. Kate and her surviving Marines barely escaped before the vessel broke apart. But they had completed their mission in a way that no council force had ever managed. They had boarded an enemy ship and destroyed it from the inside using nothing but courage and explosive charges. Rick Thompson studied the battle reports with growing amazement. Human military units were achieving success rates that seemed impossible, given their primitive equipment. The key was adaptability. When energy weapons failed, humans used bullets. When ships were damaged, humans improvised repairs. When standard tactics did not work, humans invented new ones. The psychological impact on Zephyrian forces was becoming measurable. Enemy ships avoided sectors where human units operated. Zephyrian commanders requested reinforcements when facing opponents they described as unpredictable and relentless. War Council intercepts revealed growing fear of human boarding tactics among enemy crews. Dan Collins had developed what he called human warfare principles. Fight longer than enemies expect. Use weapons they do not understand. Attack where they feel safe. Never do exactly what tactical computers predict. Most importantly, never give up even when surrender makes logical sense. Humans specialized in winning fights they were supposed to lose. Amy Rodriguez compiled intelligence reports showing how human involvement was changing the entire galactic war. Battles that should have lasted hours stretched into days as human commanders refused to accept defeat. Enemy supply lines faced constant harassment from human raiders who operated far behind front lines. Zephyrian fleet movements became cautious and defensive. Paul Grant's scouts discovered something important during a reconnaissance mission in enemy territory. Zephyrian commanders were having trouble predicting human behavior because their war computers were designed to fight logical opponents. The artificial intelligence systems that guided enemy strategy could not model human decision-making. Humans were too irrational for mathematical analysis. Kate Williams was promoted to major after the cargo ship mission, but she spent her time training other human Marines in boarding tactics. The techniques were spreading throughout the Council fleet. Alien soldiers learned to use kinetic weapons in close combat. They studied human methods for fighting inside enemy ships. Some of them were actually getting good at it. The war was changing. Battle reports showed new patterns of victory and defeat. Council forces equipped with human weapons and trained in human tactics were winning engagements that should have been impossible. Enemy formations optimized for energy weapon combat were vulnerable to kinetic attacks. Zephyrian shield technology that had seemed invincible was useless against tungsten bullets. But Kate noticed something else in the intelligence summaries. The Zephyrian Empire was adapting too. Enemy ships carried more kinetic armor now. Zephyrian boarding parties were being trained for close combat. The aliens were learning human warfare methods and using them against their creators. Alex Bradley worried that the war might be entering a new and more dangerous phase. Humans had given the galaxy new ways to fight and kill. Those methods were spreading to both sides of the conflict. The galaxy was becoming a more violent place because humans had showed everyone how to be more creative about destruction. Helen Price warned that psychological warfare worked both ways. If humans could make enemies afraid, then enemies could make humans afraid too. The Zephyrian Empire was studying human behavior now. They were learning to predict and counter human tactics. The advantage of unpredictability would not last forever. Kate stood on the observation deck of the Council flagship, looking out at the stars. 6 months ago, humans had been alone in the galaxy. Now they were teaching aliens how to fight wars more effectively. She wondered what historians would say about humanity's contribution to galactic civilization. Would they be remembered as peacemakers or as the species that made warfare more terrible? Ben Carter had dreamed of commanding a starship since childhood, but he never imagined it would be during the most important battle in galactic history. 2 years after humans joined the war, the conflict had changed completely. Human tactics and weapons were used by both sides now. The galaxy was learning new ways to fight, and Ben commanded the ship that would test whether humans could still make a difference. The USS Liberty was humanity's first purpose-built warship designed specifically for galactic combat. It mounted both traditional Council energy weapons and the devastating kinetic artillery systems that humans had developed. The ship represented the best of human and alien technology, working together under the command of officers who understood both types of warfare. Nancy Moore commanded the entire Human Council Joint Fleet. From her flagship, the Star of Earth, she had risen from a simple Marine lieutenant to Fleet Admiral in less than 2 years. Her promotion speed shocked alien officers who were used to advancement taking decades. But Nancy had proven that humans could learn galactic warfare faster than anyone expected. The Battle of Proxima Nebula would decide the outcome of the entire war. Intelligence reports showed that the Zephyrian Empire was massing their largest fleet ever assembled. Over 300 warships protected by quantum shields and supported by automated defense platforms. If the combined force broke through Council defenses, the war would be over. Nancy faced a tactical nightmare. Her fleet numbered only 90 ships against an enemy force more than 3 times larger. Traditional Council doctrine called for either retreat or requesting massive reinforcements. But reinforcements would take months to arrive. The Zephyrian fleet would have conquered a dozen star systems by then. Tony Rodriguez served as chief engineer aboard the Liberty. He had spent months preparing for this battle by studying the Proxima Nebula in detail. The dense gas clouds would interfere with sensor systems and energy weapons. Most commanders would avoid fighting in such conditions, but Tony saw opportunity where others saw problems. The plan Nancy developed became known as the Chicago Gambit, after the Earth city where she had first proposed it. Human ships would use their superior maneuverability to lure the Zephyrian fleet into the nebula, where advanced sensors became useless. Then they would implement tactics that no galactic warfare computer could predict. Ben positioned the Liberty at the center of the human formation as they approached the enemy fleet. Zephyrian commanders had learned to respect human weapons, but they still considered human ships inferior in direct combat. The aliens formed traditional battle lines optimized for energy weapon exchanges at long range. The first phase worked exactly as planned. Human ships engaged the enemy fleet at maximum range, then began a fighting withdrawal toward the nebula. Zephyrian commanders followed cautiously, wary of human tricks but confident in their overwhelming numerical advantage. They entered the gas clouds in perfect formation. Then the humans disappeared. Ben ordered all ships to shut down active sensors and switched to passive navigation systems. The Liberty went silent running, using techniques borrowed from Earth submarine warfare. In the dense nebula clouds, human ships became invisible to enemy sensors designed to track energy signatures. For 18 hours, the Zephyrian fleet searched for opponents that seemed to have vanished completely. Enemy commanders grew nervous as their sophisticated sensors found nothing but gas and cosmic dust. Their ships maintained perfect formations, but they had no targets to shoot at. The psychological pressure of waiting for an attack was enormous. Tony Rodriguez had prepared the battlefield weeks in advance. Human engineering teams had seeded the nebula with what they called surprise packages. Dormant kinetic mines activated by proximity sensors lay scattered throughout the gas clouds. The weapons were too simple for enemy sensors to detect, but powerful enough to cripple any ship that came too close. The attack, when it finally came, was unlike anything in galactic warfare history. Human ships struck simultaneously from dozens of directions using kinetic weapons that the nebula particles helped conceal until the moment of impact. Zephyrian commanders found themselves under fire from enemies they could not see using weapons they could barely track. Ben commanded his ship through the most complex battle of his life. The Liberty moved through the nebula using navigation skills learned from Earth's maritime traditions. Dead reckoning and compass headings replaced computer guidance. Human intuition substituted for sophisticated sensor networks. The crew fought like pirates in a three-dimensional ocean of gas and stars. The kinetic mines Tony had planted added chaos to an already confused battle. Zephyrian ships trying to maintain formation found themselves in minefields that appeared and disappeared without warning. Explosions lit up the nebula from inside, creating a light show that was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Nancy Moore coordinated the entire battle from memory and instinct. Traditional command and control systems were useless in the nebula environment. She relied on prearranged signals and the independent judgment of ship commanders like Ben. Human naval, traditions that emphasized individual initiative proved perfectly suited for the chaotic conditions. The Zephyrian response revealed the fundamental difference between human and alien approaches to warfare. Enemy commanders tried to restore order and re-establish proper formations. They called for reinforcements and attempted to withdraw to clear space where their advanced sensors would work properly. Everything they did was logical and predictable. Ben anticipated every enemy move because he understood how alien minds worked. Council military academies had taught him that galactic species preferred orderly battles with clear objectives and measurable outcomes. Humans were different. They thrived in chaos and confusion. The nebula environment that handicapped alien forces actually gave humans advantages. The battle lasted 3 days. Zephyrian ships were systematically destroyed or damaged by opponents they could rarely see and never predict. Human tactics that seemed random were actually carefully coordinated. Individual ship commanders made independent decisions that somehow supported the overall battle plan without central coordination. When the surviving enemy ships finally retreated from the nebula, they left behind the wreckage of over 200 vessels. The Zephyrian Empire had suffered their worst defeat in the entire 300-year war. More importantly, they had been beaten by tactics they could not understand or copy. Ben walked through the Liberty after the battle, checking damage and casualties. His ship had taken hits, but nothing critical. More importantly, his crew had performed beyond all expectations. Human officers and alien crew members had worked together using combat techniques that neither species could have developed alone. The victory at Proxima Nebula marked a turning point in the Galactic War. For the first time in 3 centuries, a council fleet had achieved decisive victory against superior enemy numbers. Intelligence reports showed that Zephyrian morale was collapsing across their empire. Enemy commanders were requesting transfers away from sectors where human forces operated. Nancy Moore was promoted to Supreme Allied Commander within days of the battle. Her new responsibilities included coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history, The Council had decided to launch simultaneous offensives across dozens of star systems. Human tactical innovations would be tested on a scale never before attempted, but Ben worried about what success might cost. The galaxy was learning that humans were extremely good at warfare. Maybe too good. Other species were starting to study human military history and asking uncomfortable questions about a civilization that had fought so many wars before reaching the stars. Tony Rodriguez pointed out something disturbing in the after-action reports. Zephyrian forces were adapting to human tactics faster than expected. Enemy ships now carried kinetic armor and close combat weapons. Some Zephyrian commanders were even trying to copy human unpredictability with mixed results. The war was changing again. Both sides now used human-inspired weapons and tactics. Battles were becoming more destructive as commanders learned to think like humans. The galaxy was discovering that human methods of warfare were extremely effective but also extremely dangerous when both sides used them. Ben stood on the Liberty Bridge, looking out at the nebula where humanity had won its greatest victory. The gas clouds were still glowing from explosions that had happened days earlier. The light was beautiful, but it represented the destruction of hundreds of ships and thousands of lives. Human ingenuity had made the galaxy a more dangerous place. The next phase of the war would test whether humans could use their talents for creation as well as destruction. Victory in battle was only the beginning. Now humanity would have to help build a peace that could last longer than the war that preceded it. Amy Rodriguez had never expected to become humanity's first military advisor to an alien alliance, but 3 months after the New Horizon returned to Earth, everything changed. The Galactic Council faced their worst crisis in the 300-year war. Zephyrian scientists had developed quantum shields that made their ships nearly invulnerable to energy weapons. Council fleets suffered defeat after defeat across dozens of star systems. The emergency message arrived at Earth's United Nations headquarters on a Wednesday. Ambassador Vexthaler requested immediate assistance from any human military experts willing to observe Council operations. The request surprised everyone. 3 months earlier, the aliens had politely told humans to go home and grow up. Now they wanted help. Amy had commanded Earth's space defense forces for 8 years. She understood space combat better than any human alive. When the UN asked for volunteers, she stepped forward immediately. The chance to see galactic warfare up close was too important to miss. She also suspected the aliens were more desperate than they wanted to admit. The Council transport ship that picked her up was bigger than any human city. Amy felt like an ant walking through a cathedral. Alien crew members from a dozen different species worked together with perfect efficiency. Some looked like giant insects. Others resembled walking trees or floating clouds of gas. All of them ignored the primitive human in their midst. Steve Parker arrived 2 days after Amy reached the Council fleet. He brought 50 of Earth's best military volunteers and a cargo hold full of human weapons. The Council had agreed to let humans observe their operations in exchange for sharing Earth's historical military data. They wanted to study how primitive species conducted warfare. The human volunteers were assigned quarters in the oldest section of the flagship. Their rooms were meant for Council species that had joined the Alliance thousands of years ago, but had since evolved beyond physical bodies. The facilities worked, but everything felt ancient and unused. Amy got the message. Humans were guests who were not expected to stay long. War Marshal Keth Varan briefed the humans on the current tactical situation. The Zephyrian quantum shields absorbed energy attacks and converted them into power for ship systems. The harder Council forces fired at enemy vessels, the stronger the shields became. Traditional weapons were useless. New weapons took years to develop. The Council was running out of options. Amy watched recordings of recent battles. Council ships fired perfect streams of coherent energy at Zephyrian targets. The enemy shields glowed brighter with each hit. Council weapons were incredibly advanced, but they all worked the same way. Energy against energy, force against force. The battles looked like light shows where nothing got damaged. Dan Collins was a sergeant in Earth's Marine Corps. He had fought in conflicts across Earth using every type of weapon humans had invented. While the alien officers discussed energy frequencies and quantum resonance patterns, Dan asked a simple question. What happened if you just ignored the shields? The question made no sense to the Council military leaders. Shields existed to be penetrated or overwhelmed. You developed stronger weapons to break through enemy defenses. That was how space warfare worked. Dan tried to explain, but the translator had trouble with his concept. Amy understood what Dan meant. She asked the council scientists about the quantum shields. How did they work? What did they protect against? The answers revealed something interesting. The shields were designed to stop energy weapons. They absorbed electromagnetic radiation, particle beams, and plasma attacks. But nobody had asked what happened when solid objects hit them. Steve Parker suggested a test. The human volunteers had brought railguns from Earth. These weapons used magnetic fields to fire metal projectiles at tremendous speeds. The projectiles were not energy beams. They were solid chunks of tungsten moving at significant fractions of light speed. Maybe they could pass right through shields designed to stop energy attacks. The council scientists were horrified by the suggestion. Kinetic weapons were barbarically primitive. Civilized species had abandoned such crude technology millennia ago. Firing metal bullets at enemy ships was like throwing rocks. It was undignified and inefficient. But War Marshal Keth Varan was desperate enough to try anything. A small council frigate was modified with human railgun systems. The weapon looked tiny compared to the ship's massive energy cannons. Amy wondered if the test would prove anything useful. The target was a captured Zephyrian patrol craft. Its quantum shields were fully charged and operating at maximum efficiency. Council energy weapons had failed to penetrate these defenses for months. The modified frigate approached to optimal firing range. Julie Foster commanded the test ship. She had been a captain in Earth's merchant marine before volunteering for the expedition. Her steady hands and calm voice made her perfect for the dangerous experiment. She armed the railgun and selected a tungsten penetrator round. The projectile left the barrel at 70,000 kilometers per second. It crossed the distance to the target in less than a heartbeat. The Zephyrian quantum shields offered no resistance whatsoever. The tungsten rod punched through the enemy hull like it was made of paper. The explosion that followed lit up the test range. Silence filled the council command center. Amy watched alien faces that showed shock and amazement. War Marshal Keth Varan stared at the tactical display like he could not believe what had happened. The most advanced shields in the galaxy had been defeated by a metal bullet. The implications hit everyone at once. Quantum shields that had made Zephyrian ships invulnerable were useless against kinetic weapons. Human technology that the Council considered primitively backward could penetrate defenses that their most advanced weapons could not touch. The entire balance of the Galactic War had potentially shifted. Amy felt excited but also worried. She understood military history well enough to know that new weapons changed wars in unpredictable ways. The railgun test proved that human kinetic weapons could damage Zephyrian ships, but it also proved that humans might have something valuable to contribute to the war effort. Steve Parker started working with Council engineers immediately. They began designing new kinetic weapon systems based on human technology, but built with alien materials and power sources. The hybrid weapons would fire projectiles at even higher speeds with better accuracy. Mass production could begin within weeks. But Amy noticed something else in the test results. The human approach to the shield problem was completely different from how Council species thought about warfare. Aliens saw the quantum shields and tried to build more powerful energy weapons. Humans saw the quantum shields and looked for ways to avoid them entirely. Dan Collins suggested other applications for human military thinking. Council forces always fought battles in space using long-range energy weapons. Human soldiers were trained for close combat and urban warfare. Maybe there were situations where boarding enemy ships and fighting inside them would work better than shooting from a distance. The Council military officers looked disturbed by the suggestion. Civilized warfare was conducted between ships at respectful distances. Actually entering enemy vessels and fighting hand-to-hand was primitive and dangerous. But Amy could see them thinking about it. Desperate times called for desperate measures. Julie Foster proposed modification of human combat tactics for space warfare. Earth's military forces had experience with guerrilla warfare, asymmetric conflicts and battles where one side had technological advantages. Maybe those lessons could apply to fighting the Zephyrian Empire. Amy submitted her first report to War Marshal Keth Varan the next day. Human kinetic weapons could penetrate quantum shields that stopped energy attacks. Human tactical thinking approached problems differently than Council military doctrine. Human experience with primitive warfare might offer new strategies against advanced enemies. The War Marshal read her report twice before responding. He agreed to expand the human program. More Earth volunteers would be brought to the Council fleet. Human weapons would be mass-produced and integrated into alien ships. Most importantly, humans would be given actual combat assignments instead of just observer status. Amy felt proud that humans had proven their worth to the galactic community, but she also felt nervous about what came next. Earth was about to become involved in a war that had lasted 3 centuries. Human technology and tactics might help the Council win battles, but wars had a way of changing everyone who fought in them. Steve Parker gathered the human volunteers for their first mission briefing. They would join a Council strike force attacking a Zephyrian supply convoy. Human railguns would provide the primary firepower. Human tactical advice would guide the operation. It was humanity's first real test in galactic warfare. As Amy prepared for combat, she wondered what people on Earth would think. 3 months ago, humans had been alone in the galaxy. Now they were about to fight in a war between alien civilizations. The universe had become a much more dangerous and exciting place. Patricia Clark had spent her entire military career preparing for wars that never happened. As Earth's top strategic planner, she had studied every conflict in human history, looking for patterns that might help humanity survive in a hostile galaxy. Now she commanded the largest military operation in galactic history and wondered if all her planning had been worth anything. 3 years had passed since the victory at Proxima Nebula. The Zephyrian Empire was retreating across dozens of star systems, but they were not defeated. Enemy forces had learned to copy human tactics with disturbing effectiveness. Battles that should have been easy victories turned into brutal grinding conflicts that lasted for months. Frank Harrison led the special operations teams that Patricia considered her most valuable asset. Human commandos had pioneered what everyone now called human warfare, small unit actions that disrupted enemy supply lines and communication networks, strikes against infrastructure targets that crippled enemy war efforts without major battles, psychological operations designed to make enemies afraid of shadows. The Zephyrian response had been predictable once Patricia understood their psychology. A species descended from hive insects could not easily adapt to individual initiative and creative thinking, but they were excellent at copying successful techniques once they understood them. Enemy special forces now used human tactics against Council supply lines with devastating effectiveness. Gary Adams commanded the diplomatic vessel New Dawn from an orbit around the neutral world of Kepler Prime. His mission was the most dangerous of the entire war. He was trying to negotiate peace with an enemy that had been fighting for 300 years. Most Council leaders considered the effort hopeless, but Patricia believed diplomacy offered the only real path to victory. Lucy Peterson had volunteered for the most thankless job in galactic politics. As humanity's first ambassador to the Zephyrian Empire, she faced the challenge of communicating with aliens whose thought processes were completely different from human psychology. The Zephyrians were not evil or cruel. They simply could not understand concepts like individual freedom or personal choice. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Human anthropologists studying captured Zephyrian records discovered that the 300-year war had started over a misunderstanding. Both the Council and the Empire wanted the same thing: safe trade routes between star systems and protection from hostile forces. But neither side had ever tried to explain their real objectives to the other. Patricia read the historical analysis with growing amazement. The galactic war that had killed billions of beings and destroyed thousands of worlds was essentially a territorial dispute. The Zephyrian Empire wanted to control space lanes to protect their merchant vessels. The Galactic Council wanted to keep those same trade routes open for all species. Both sides were fighting for commercial security, but using military methods. The revelation changed everything about Patricia's strategic planning. Military victory against the Zephyrian Empire was possible, but it would take decades and cost millions of lives. Diplomatic solution was theoretically achievable, but it required convincing both sides to abandon 3 centuries of hatred and mistrust. The choice seemed obvious to Patricia, but aliens thought differently than humans. Frank Harrison's intelligence teams discovered something else in captured enemy documents. The Zephyrian Empire was facing internal political pressure to end the war. Their hive society was efficient at coordinating large projects, but terrible at adapting to changing conditions. The introduction of human warfare tactics had disrupted their military planning in ways their leaders could not compensate for. Lucy Peterson made contact with Zephyrian peace factions through neutral intermediaries. The enemy empire included species that were tired of endless warfare. Some of them had been fighting the Council longer than their civilizations had existed. They wanted peace but did not know how to achieve it without losing face or appearing weak to their own people. The negotiation process took 6 months of careful diplomacy. Patricia coordinated military pressure to convince Zephyrian hardliners that continuing the war was impossible. At the same time, Lucy worked to offer the Empire terms that would allow them to claim victory, while actually ending the conflict. Human understanding of psychology proved essential to both efforts. Gary Adams hosted the peace conference aboard his ship because neither side trusted the other enough to meet on their home territory. The New Dawn became neutral ground where ancient enemies could talk without losing dignity. Human diplomatic protocols borrowed from Earth's United Nations provided structure for negotiations between species that had different concepts of law and honor. The final agreement surprised everyone involved in the negotiations. Instead of traditional surrender terms, the treaty established new trade regulations that gave both sides what they had originally wanted. The Zephyrian Empire would control security for major shipping routes. The Galactic Council would regulate commerce and prevent discrimination against member species. Patricia studied the peace treaty with professional admiration. Lucy Peterson had accomplished something that 3 centuries of warfare had failed to achieve. She had found a solution that allowed both sides to win. The Zephyrians got the trade route security they needed. The Council maintained the commercial freedom they wanted. Nobody had to admit defeat, but the treaty required enforcement mechanisms that had never existed before. A joint peacekeeping force would patrol disputed star systems. Mixed crews from both sides would work together to prevent future conflicts. Most importantly, human officers would serve as neutral mediators when disagreements arose between former enemies. Frank Harrison expressed concerns about humanity's new role in galactic politics. Humans had proven extremely effective at warfare, but peacekeeping required different skills. Could a species that had fought so many wars on Earth successfully prevent wars between aliens? The historical precedents were not encouraging. Lucy Peterson was more optimistic about humanity's future in the galaxy. Humans had unique experience with both conflict and cooperation. Earth's history included terrible wars, but also examples of former enemies becoming allies. Maybe that experience would prove valuable in helping alien species learn to live together peacefully. The peace treaty was signed on a Tuesday morning with representatives from over 200 species in attendance. Patricia watched the ceremony from the New Dawn Bridge and felt proud of what humanity had accomplished. In less than 3 years, humans had helped end a war that had lasted 3 centuries. But she also felt nervous about what came next. The galaxy after the war would be different from anything that had existed before. Human influence on alien military thinking had changed how species approached conflict resolution. Trade routes that had been battlefields for centuries would become peaceful commercial highways. Former enemies would have to learn to work together as partners. Gary Adams was appointed as the first director of the new Galactic Peacekeeping Organization. His headquarters ship would patrol disputed regions and mediate conflicts before they could escalate into warfare. The position carried enormous responsibility and almost no precedent for success. Most interstellar conflicts in galactic history had been resolved through conquest rather than negotiation. Patricia remained as military advisor to the peacekeeping forces. Her job was to ensure that former enemies could not easily return to warfare if diplomatic solutions failed. Human tactical innovations that had helped win the war would now be used to prevent future wars. The irony was not lost on her. Frank Harrison established training programs to teach human conflict resolution techniques to alien peacekeeping forces. Species that had been fighting each other for centuries would learn human methods for communication, negotiation, and compromise. The program represented humanity's attempt to export their best qualities rather than just their military expertise. Lucy Peterson opened the first embassy of human affairs on the Council homeworld. Her mission was to help humanity integrate into galactic civilization as a full member rather than just a military ally. The position required balancing human interests with the needs of hundreds of other species. It was perhaps the most difficult diplomatic assignment in galactic history. 5 years after the New Horizon had stumbled into an ancient galactic war, humanity had become one of the most important species in known space, not because of superior technology or overwhelming military power, but because humans had brought something new to galactic civilization. the ability to solve problems that everyone else considered unsolvable. Patricia stood in her office looking out at stars that were no longer battlefields. The galaxy was at peace for the first time in 3 centuries. Trade flowed freely between former enemy worlds. Species that had been trying to destroy each other were learning to cooperate on scientific research and cultural exchange. But Patricia also knew that peace was harder to maintain than war was to fight. The galactic civilization that humans had helped create would face new challenges that nobody could predict. Future crises would test whether humanity's contributions to the galaxy were truly valuable or just temporarily useful. The war nobody expected humans to win had ended not with human victory, but with human wisdom.